the WNBA is celebrating like it has just struck gold. Headlines scream about billions in new TV money, record ratings that supposedly mark a new era, and politicians demanding higher salaries for players. On the surface, women's basketball appears to finally be breaking through into the mainstream. But beneath the glittering press releases, the numbers tell a very different story. The players, despite all the hype, are still pocketing less than 10% of league revenue. In comparison, NBA players split revenue roughly 50-50 with owners. That discrepancy highlights just how fragile the WNBA's progress actually is. And when you examine the details more closely, the entire narrative begins to fall apart. For years, the WNBA has walked a fine line between survival and collapse. Since its launch in the late 1990s, it has managed to stay afloat but has never turned a consistent profit. Behind the highlight reels, inspirational campaigns, and marketing buzz, the books have been drenched in red ink. That is precisely why the announcement of a new $2.2 billion television rights deal was treated like salvation. Spread across 11 years with powerhouse networks like Disney, Amazon, and NBC, it seemed like the ultimate validation of women's basketball. But while the deal looks like a jackpot on paper, the cracks start to show almost immediately when you study its details. The money will not actually begin flowing until 2026, meaning the current hype has little immediate financial impact. More importantly, a large portion of that deal exists only because the WNBA was packaged alongside the NBA. This bundling reveals the league's true reality. The NBA is one of the most valuable sports properties in the world, commanding billions in broadcast revenue and enormous leverage in negotiations. When Adam Silver sat at the table to renegotiate broadcast rights, he wasn't only selling NBA games. He made sure the broadcasters who wanted access to the NBA's primetime schedule also carried WNBA content, whether they wanted to or not. The result was a windfall for the Women's League, but it was not the product of pure market demand. Instead, it was a subsidy disguised as a business triumph. Just like an internet provider forcing customers to pay for a landline they never use, the WNBA was included in the deal not because it commanded the value itself, but because it was attached to something far more valuable. Even so, players are pointing to that $2.2 billion figure as justification for higher salaries. Their argument is simple. If the league is making billions, the athletes deserve a larger slice of the pie. Yet the uncomfortable truth is that the money is not profit generated by organic fan demand. It is guaranteed cash flow created by the NBA's muscle and corporate packaging. None of the cash has arrived yet, and even when it does, it will not magically transform into self-sustaining revenue. That raises a critical issue for the league's future, especially with 3 new expansion teams already announced, and the collective bargaining agreement scheduled for renegotiation after the 2025 season. History suggests that momentum is fragile. Each time the WNBA has appeared to take a major step forward, it has quickly stumbled back under the weight of its financial reality. And the latest so-called breakthrough faces an even greater test. Ratings, while trumpeted as record-breaking, are far more complicated when you dig beneath the surface. League officials proudly cite an average of 969,000 viewers across networks like ABC, ESPN, CBS, and ION, calling it the most watched season since 1998. On the surface, that sounds impressive, but averages often distort reality. When you separate the numbers, a troubling picture emerges. The vast majority of this growth can be traced back to one name, Caitlin Clark. Her arrival injected unprecedented buzz into the WNBA, with games featuring her Indiana Fever drawing as many as 1.8 million viewers on CBS and crossing 2 million on ABC. Yet when Clark was not on the court, ratings dropped sharply, sometimes to 500,000 or fewer. The supposed league-wide boom was, in reality, the impact of one superstar dragging the numbers upward almost single-handedly. And when Clark was sidelined by injury, the truth became undeniable. Ratings dipped, attendance sagged, and the narrative of unstoppable growth suddenly looked far shakier. The hype that executives had insisted was spread across the league collapsed the moment its brightest star went missing. Attendance figures tell a similar story. League press releases boasted that 7 teams averaged over 10,000 fans per game this season. At first glance, that seems like a landmark achievement. But context once again changes the picture. Many of those crowds filled arenas that seat nearly twice that number, meaning that even in strong markets, buildings were half empty on most nights. Furthermore, many of the so-called sellouts were achieved through heavily discounted tickets or giveaways, creating the appearance of popularity without reflecting real demand. Just as with TV ratings, the truth is hidden in the details. Clark's presence boosted attendance dramatically, but without her, the record-setting figures quickly deflated. This dependence on one player underscores the central fragility of the WNBA's success story. Strong leagues are built to withstand the absence of even their biggest stars. The NBA did not collapse when Kobe Bryant retired, nor did the NFL crumble when Patrick Mahomes missed time. Baseball, hockey, and soccer are all bigger than individual players. But the WNBA, at least for now, remains tethered to Clark. Without her, the buzz vanishes almost overnight. That is not sustainable growth. It is dependency disguised as momentum. The issue becomes even more complicated when politics enters the picture. Members of the Democratic Women's Caucus recently pressured the league to deliver a fair collective bargaining agreement, demanding higher salaries for players. The optics are powerful, framing the debate as one of fairness and equality. But the financial reality is far less glamorous. Unlike the NBA, which generates billions in profit each year, the WNBA has never turned a consistent profit and survives largely on NBA subsidies. Demanding 50% of revenue sounds fair on paper, but when the revenue pool itself is negative, such a demand becomes fantasy. Without NBA backing, the league could not survive even a single month. That is not oppression, it is arithmetic. The WNBA's marketing machine has mastered the art of presenting scraps as feasts. Every small uptick is polished, amplified, and framed as proof of unstoppable momentum. The league loves to brag that this was the most watched season since 1998, but the comparison is flimsy. The media landscape of 25 years ago was entirely different. Streaming didn't exist, social media hadn't arrived, and viewers had far fewer options competing for attention. Matching a number from the late 1990s is not proof of dominance in 2024. It is trivia dressed up as achievement. At its core, the WNBA's financial picture remains dependent, fragile, and propped up. The $2.2 billion TV rights deal may look like salvation, but it is built more on the NBA's leverage than the WNBA's own strength. The surge in ratings is more about Caitlin Clark's stardom than widespread interest in women's basketball. The attendance numbers often rely on discounted tickets and special promotions rather than true demand. And the players' push for a bigger slice of revenue is undercut by the simple fact that there has never been any consistent profit to share. The uncomfortable truth is that the league's supposed breakthrough is built on shaky foundations. It shines brightly in press releases, but once you scratch the surface, the cracks begin to show. Without Clark, the hype falters. Without the NBA's financial backing, the league cannot sustain itself. And without genuine fan demand, the billion-dollar TV deal is little more than a subsidy disguised as success. Until the WNBA can generate real profit, build sustainable fan engagement, and stand independent of both the NBA and the fortunes of a single player, its story will remain one of smoke and mirrors rather than authentic growth. For now, the dream of unstoppable momentum looks less like a breakthrough and more like an illusion carefully constructed to hide the harsh reality beneath. The WNBA has been parading its latest headlines like trophies. Record ratings, surging attendance, and billions in new television money are framed as proof that women's basketball has finally broken through. Politicians have joined the chorus, demanding higher pay for players and framing the issue as a fight for fairness. On the surface, it sounds like a movement that can no longer be denied. But once the numbers are stripped of their polish, the narrative begins to unravel. The uncomfortable truth is that the WNBA has never generated consistent profits. Not last season, not the one before it, and not at any point in its history. Year after year, the league operates at a loss, with the NBA covering the financial shortfall. That means when WNBA players demand half of league revenue, they are essentially asking for 50% of a negative number. You cannot cash a paycheck for money that does not exist. That hasn't stopped political voices from pushing the storyline. The Democratic Women's Caucus recently sent letters pressuring the league to deliver a new collective bargaining agreement, presenting WNBA players as victims of economic injustice. The optics are powerful. Equal pay always makes for catchy headlines, and no politician wants to appear on the wrong side of that argument. But the reality is much less glamorous. These are not underpaid minors risking their lives in unsafe conditions. These are professional athletes participating in a league that survives almost entirely because the NBA provides subsidies to keep the lights on. Without that backing, the WNBA could not sustain itself for even a single month. Until that changes, calls for a larger revenue split have less to do with fairness and far more to do with fantasy. The league's public relations machine leans heavily on television ratings to build its case. Executives highlight an average of 969,000 viewers across ABC, ESPN, CBS, and ION, describing it as the most watched season since 1998. That sounds like a breakthrough until you dig deeper. Averages conceal as much as they reveal, and in this case, they disguise a reality built almost entirely on the shoulders of one player, Caitlin Clark. Whenever Clark was on the floor, numbers surged. Her Indiana Fever drew nearly 1.8 million viewers for a CBS broadcast and regularly cleared 2 million on ABC. On ESPN, she consistently pulled over 1 million. But when Clark wasn't playing, Indiana's games fell to under 1 million viewers, and league-wide averages without her dropped closer to 500,000. The pattern was undeniable. Fans were tuning in not for the WNBA brand, not for balance across rosters, but almost exclusively for Clark. The inconsistency is even more obvious when comparing broadcasts. On ABC, games featuring Clark pulled around 2 million viewers, while other matchups barely broke 1 million. On ESPN, she lifted the average to over 1 million, while non-Clark games hovered closer to 600,000. That gap is not growth spread evenly across the league. It is one player propping up the entire narrative. The story becomes murkier when considering the missing data. 4 nationally televised games on ESPN and ABC mysteriously had no ratings released. In the world of sports media, silence is rarely a coincidence. If those games had delivered big numbers, networks would have promoted them relentlessly. Instead, the results disappeared into a void. It raises an obvious suspicion. The ratings were too weak to support the narrative of unstoppable growth. Networks have buried disappointing numbers before, and the silence surrounding those broadcasts speaks louder than any press release. Attendance numbers tell a parallel story. League officials boasted that 7 teams averaged more than 10,000 fans per game, claiming it as proof of momentum. But context changes everything. Take the Minnesota Lynx. On paper, they averaged nearly 10,000. But their arena seats almost twice that. A building half full is not evidence of dominance. It is evidence of room that could not be filled. Even reported sellouts often come with asterisks. Many tickets are heavily discounted or given away to inflate the totals and make crowds appear larger on television. Packed lower bowls hide empty upper sections, creating the illusion of demand that is not there. This is the spin machine at work. Cherry-picking the brightest numbers, packaging them neatly, and hoping no one notices the weak spots. Caitlin Clark's injury only made the cracks more visible. Without her on the floor, attendance dipped in multiple markets. Crowds weren't there for the WNBA itself. They were there for one player. The record-setting streaks evaporated the moment she stepped off the court. That kind of dependency is not sustainable growth. It is a temporary sugar high that disappears as soon as the supply is interrupted. The broader context exposes even more of the illusion. League officials proudly point out that this was the most watched season since 1998. At first glance, that sounds like a landmark achievement. But the media environment in 1998 was nothing like today. There was no streaming, no social media, and far fewer entertainment options competing for attention. Claiming to have beaten a record set 25 years ago is less a sign of dominance and more like bragging about breaking a personal best in a video game you haven't played since middle school. It's trivia dressed as achievement. That magic figure of 969,000 average viewers is presented as if it puts the WNBA in the same stratosphere as the NBA Finals or the NFL playoffs. In reality, those numbers place the league alongside reruns of Shark Tank or a middling episode of 90 Day Fiancé. That's the scale, not professional dominance, but cable filler territory. And still, the missing data remains the most telling piece. If the WNBA had truly shattered expectations across the board, there would be no reason for any broadcast numbers to be hidden. Every network and league office in sports loves to brag when the numbers are strong. When silence replaces celebration, it usually means the results would shatter the narrative being sold. This is the WNBA's consistent pattern. Take a handful of bright spots, inflate them into proof of momentum, and bury anything that contradicts the story. The league has become skilled at transforming scraps into feasts, at spinning mediocrity into triumph, and at packaging fragility as strength. But the underlying truth remains. The WNBA does not stand on its own. Its television deal is not a victory earned through market demand, but a bundled subsidy created by the NBA's leverage. Its ratings boom is not league-wide growth, but the magnetic draw of a single superstar. Its attendance milestones are padded with discounts and giveaways, and its supposed progress collapses whenever Clark is absent. The political push for equal pay adds another layer of illusion. Demanding 50% of revenue resonates emotionally, but revenue built on losses is nothing to celebrate. Without NBA support, the WNBA's financial structure would collapse immediately. Calls for equality in revenue sharing are hollow when the revenue itself is manufactured by subsidies. The WNBA has mastered the art of appearances, but appearances cannot pay the bills forever. Until the league generates real profits, builds sustainable fan demand independent of one player, and stops relying on the NBA's financial lifeline, its so-called breakthrough will remain more illusion than reality. The headlines shine brightly, but behind them is a league still struggling to prove it belongs on its own 2 feet. The WNBA loves to talk about growth. They post record-breaking headlines, point to flashy attendance numbers, and lean on TV deals as proof that women's basketball is finally breaking through. On the surface, it sounds convincing, but when you peel back the layers, the story doesn't hold. The truth is uncomfortable, and the league works hard to keep it hidden. Because behind the smoke and mirrors, one thing becomes clear. This isn't balanced growth, it's dependency. And it all revolves around one player, Caitlin Clark. Every time Clark steps on the court, the metrics explode. Viewership climbs, seats fill, media outlets rush to cover her. But when she isn't playing, everything falls apart. Ratings sink, energy disappears, and the buzz that the league brags about collapses overnight. That's not organic growth. That's not a league building something sustainable. That's a single superstar holding up the entire operation. The numbers paint the picture better than any press release. On CBS, Caitlin Clark's games averaged almost 1.8 million viewers. Without her, the rest of the WNBA hovered around just 83,000. On ESPN, she pulled 1.4 million, while other matchups struggled to clear 600,000. On ABC, Clark's games crossed the 2 million mark, while the rest barely scraped past 1. The pattern is undeniable. Clark equals attention. Without her, the spotlight vanishes. And yet, instead of embracing that reality, the league tries to spin a different story. They push other names, Aya Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Alyssa Thomas, DeWanna Bonner, hoping casual fans will latch on. But the data proves otherwise. For the average viewer, those names don't move the needle. Clark does. Pretending otherwise is like claiming Michael Jordan was just another guy on the Bulls. It's absurd. What makes it stranger is how hesitant the league seems to fully center her. They want to prove the WNBA is bigger than one player, but it's not. Not yet. And by refusing to admit the obvious, they're biting the hand that feeds them. Every surge in ratings, every sellout crowd, every sponsor suddenly willing to cut a check, it all traces back to Clark. She isn't just part of the puzzle. She is the puzzle. And the moment she's out, the picture collapses. That's not stability. That's dependency. And it's why every record the WNBA brags about comes with an invisible asterisk. Sports leagues are supposed to outlast individual stars. The NFL didn't collapse when Tom Brady retired. The NBA didn't fall apart when Kobe Bryant walked away. Baseball doesn't hinge on one slugger keeping fans engaged. But the WNBA? Take Clark out of the equation, and suddenly, the hype machine sputters. Ratings nosedive, arenas look half empty, and the conversation shifts back to survival. That's the danger. It's not just today's problem, it's tomorrow's. What happens if Clark's appeal fades in a few years? What if she gets injured again? What if fans move on to a different sport entirely? If the entire house is built on one foundation, one crack can bring the whole thing down. And you can already see those cracks. Attendance outside Indiana is inconsistent. Teams brag about sellouts, but many of those sellouts happen in 10,000-seat arenas, tiny compared to NBA stadiums, and often padded with heavy discounts or even free tickets. On TV, networks aren't throwing money at the WNBA because fans are demanding it. They're buying bundled packages, forced to take women's games along with NBA rights. That's not market demand. That's NBA muscle. The $2.2 billion TV deal is the clearest example. The moment it was announced, WNBA players saw it as payday. Bigger contracts, charter flights, perks that mirrored the NBA, all of it suddenly on the table. On the surface, you can't blame them. If the league is swimming in cash, why shouldn't the athletes get their share? But here's the problem. That money isn't flowing from organic demand. It's coming from packaging and pressure. If the WNBA were truly worth $200 million a year in broadcast rights, networks would have lined up years ago. They didn't. It took Adam Silver twisting arms and bundling deals to make it happen. The demand wasn't there. ESPN wasn't begging for more WNBA games in primetime. Sponsors weren't knocking down the door. The deal exists because of leverage, not because of value. That's where the math collapses. WNBA players look at the NBA revenue split 50-50 between players and owners and assume they deserve the same. But the NBA generates billions in profit. The WNBA doesn't generate profit at all. Comparing the two is like running a lemonade stand on the corner and demanding Starbucks salaries. It's not about gender, it's about scale. One business is worth billions. The other operates at a loss. Pointing that out isn't anti-woman. It's not about opposing equality. It's about arithmetic. If the money doesn't exist, you can't spend it. That's true in any business. Until the WNBA stands on its own 2 feet, demanding NBA-level contracts isn't fairness. It's entitlement colliding with reality. Clark's recent injury put all of this into sharper focus. For months, the league insisted its growth was broad and balanced, bigger than one star. But the second she was sidelined, the illusion cracked. Ratings dipped, attendance sagged, headlines slowed. Strong leagues can survive the loss of a single player. The NFL doesn't collapse if Patrick Mahomes misses a game. The NBA doesn't crumble if LeBron takes a night off. But the WNBA? Take away Caitlin Clark and the whole tent starts to wobble. That's because the hype isn't built on the league. It's built on her. The WNBA wants fans, sponsors, and politicians to believe women's basketball is finally exploding. But strip away the carefully curated press releases, and the truth is simpler. The league is still dependent, still subsidized, still desperate for validation. And that brings us to the harshest reality of all. The WNBA isn't hiding record-breaking success. It's hiding fragility. Every headline, every number, every deal, it's all one player away from vanishing. If Clark stays healthy, if her appeal keeps climbing, the league can ride the wave. But if that wave crashes, there's no backup plan. That's the uncomfortable truth. What's being sold as growth is really dependency. What's framed as stability is really a gamble. And until the WNBA builds something bigger than one star, its future will always rest on shaky ground. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just a rising star. She's the lifeline.